Well, hello and welcome to session 4 of our Lenten Bible Study based on the work of Adam Hamilton, well-known author and pastor, and the book that he's written entitled Words of Life. I know that some of you have this book and some of you do not. It is well worth reading, and you might want to share that with other people, whether they've engaged in this entire study or not. And what we're doing is continuing to delve into the 10 Commandments of the Old Testament and to see what those commandments really mean and how they were written in that time, but more importantly, how Jesus helped apply them to our everyday lives. And so today we will be looking at the 6th commandment. The 6th commandment is very short, which tells us that because something's pithy doesn't mean that it's not profound. The commandment is, thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not kill. Short as that, but it is loaded with meaning. So you can find that commandment in Exodus 20, where all 10 commandments are written, and it's in verse 13. Now, near the beginning of the 6th chapter in our book, Hamilton points out that the prohibition against killing actually appears in nearly every ancient law code. So it's not just that God told us in the tablets to Moses not to kill, but it's been a part of pretty much every civilized society. It's been the most basic of ethical and moral requirements since the beginning of civilized society. And yet the last 100 years have been the deadliest in the history of the human race. Would you agree with that? That's what he says. I agree. 100 years, that's a good number. It seems clear that humanity has already failed to live by the most basic of ethical imperatives. When was the last time that you were confronted, heard about, read about, saw an act of violence? Either personally or you learned about it through the media.
You see it almost daily.
I was hoping that you would, yeah, exactly. We're almost overwhelmed by that question, like, well, almost, where are we not seeing it? Would have almost been a better question. Whoever thought we'd get to that point? I comment because I get messages, I'll probably get one before this session's over, messages all the time from Channel 12, which covers Greensboro and Winston and surrounding areas. And every morning without fail, it's a murder or it's a shooting or stabbing. This morning it was a stabbing. Victims in the hospital. In Myanmar, the young lady, Sin, was shot in the head and killed, along with a dozen other women there that were protesting. It's everywhere. It's not in a place, it's everywhere. How do you react to that?
I think it's frightening.
Frightening? Mm-hmm.
And you don't hope that it does not happen in your neighborhood.
Yeah. Our self-centeredness kicks in. It's almost a self-preservation thing. Oh Lord, this is really bad, but thank goodness it was X number of miles or whatever away, and don't let it get any closer. That's a normal reaction, even though it is at the end of the day self-centered, because we remember the old poem that, when they finally come for us, where will our help be? So violence anywhere is violence for us, in my opinion. But I worry that in some ways our reaction might be a desensitized reaction. I just said, I know every morning there's going to be a death or something. Isn't that a terrible way that you get a beep on your iPhone or you get a message somewhere and you know that it's not going to be, good news? We cannot become desensitized to the violence and the deaths. And yet it's hard not to when it is almost as common as the sun coming up. So, well, through our world, we can sometimes see that things are dangerous and unpredictable. We know that without doubt. And we're going to study today the fact that God wants peace for us. I think that's the other reason we can't get desensitized to this, because the world maybe has changed or become more violent, but God's attitude about it, God's expectations for humanity have not changed at all. They are still the same. And then Jesus teaches about what it means to live in a way that honors God's image. Every death or attack on a person is a death or attack of God's image in humanity. So with that said, I invite our folks at home and our folks here in the chapel with me to open our study with prayer. Lord, we praise you for being present, being with us this day and every day. We pray that you would help us to know you better through each and every commandment that we're exploring, and that we would learn more about your desire and hope for our lives. We do praise you as the God of peace, even in this turbulent, violent world. And we pray this prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, as is our habit, we're going to kick off today's discussion by hearing what our author, Adam Hamilton, wants to share about this particular commandment. Let's listen and watch.
And now we come to the sixth commandment. And I wonder how Moses heard these words when God said, "You shall not kill." I wonder if he looked down at his feet in shame, remembering 40 years earlier when he killed the Egyptian taskmaster, how he lived as a fugitive in Sinai for 40 years because of that crime. I wonder if he felt guilty at that moment. Now, the command to not murder has far-reaching consequences, or not kill has far-reaching consequences, but I thought we might start by visiting once more with Rabbi Art Nemetov. Let's take a listen. So let's take a look at do not kill, which seems pretty straightforward, although do not kill is it's not referring to animals because we're allowed to eat. It's not referring to war because war is at times commanded in Scripture. It's not referred to capital punishment because you find capital punishment in the Torah. So when it's speaking about do not kill, what is the commandment saying?
I would suggest that the English that we're using may be inappropriate or inaccurate. I would rather use do not murder.
Yeah.
Murder is prohibited. Killing is permitted under certain circumstances.
Right.
When we murder another human being, we are murdering God's image. And so we are, in fact, murdering God. And when you look at the Ten Commandments, you have 5 here and 5 here. In Jewish tradition, the first one, which is I am God, matches the 6th one, which is do not murder. And that's why they're parallel, because we are creating God's image. We have God's soul within us. And if we destroy that, it's as though we're destroying God.
Yes, good. What does that, given that most of your members are not inclined to murder someone else?
I hope not.
Yes, so what might this commandment mean for people who are not inclined to murder someone else? Is there any additional meaning, or is it simply the prohibition against this?
I think it's a statement about the value of life, that each human being is creating God's image, and that when we harm another person, it's as though we're harming God.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's just about murder, but it uses that as the extreme example.
Right. Jesus, when he spoke about this, talked about how you've heard that it was said of old, you shall not murder, but then he talks about not hating, and he talks about loving your enemy and turning the other cheek, and all of these things are sort of bound up in this not doing harm, but instead practicing love towards the other. So for Jesus, the command not to murder wasn't just about not killing people. I'm not worried that any of you watching this video are tempted to kill other human beings, but I'm pretty certain that all of us have had the tendency to use words in a way that bring harm to other people. We learned as children, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never harm me. But we all know that's not true. And how easy it is for us to gossip about someone else, or to speak about somebody in a way that's not true, to pass on rumors, or today to offer harmful words by using not just our lips, but our cell phones as we're typing into social media platforms, talking on Facebook or Twitter, or even the emojis that we use are all ways of either blessing or harming other people. And I want to encourage you to think about how are we in danger of harming other people with our words as you study this commandment. But I want to move beyond that to recognize that this commandment is not just about not killing or harming other people. Jesus flips it once more. And the positive side of this was you shall love your neighbors, you love yourself. You shall love even your enemies. That love wasn't a warm, fuzzy feeling. It was a way of blessing and doing good to others. And in the process of doing that, we find the good and beautiful life. So I want to encourage you to take the time to ponder, what does that look like today? And I want to end by taking you to another archaeological site in Egypt just to show you some of what you'd see there. So let's head to Egypt. So when you're in Luxor, one of the places you want to visit is the Luxor Temple by night. One of the important things to know about the city of Luxor, of course it was the ancient city of Thebes, is that it was here that the royal family would have been educated. So they would have been educated in philosophy, they would have been educated in law, in religion, all of these things they would have learned here in this city. So there's no question, if Moses was raised as a prince in Pharaoh's household, he would have come here to be educated. He would have seen these temples. Now, what you see here was built during the time of Moses. So during his lifetime, if we date Moses to the Exodus to 1290, this was built during Moses' lifetime. Inside this temple, we find portions that were built before the time of Moses. But when you come here, you get a chance to see, especially in the statues that are in the front, all of this built during the period of Ramses II. And if Ramses II is the pharaoh of the Exodus, then what you see is his, let's just call it what it is, an outsized ego. You're going to find statues of Ramses all over Egypt. These are, I mean, you know, we're talking statues of a man who was pharaoh 3,300 years ago, and yet when you come here, you find he wanted to make sure people remembered him. They knew who he was. And that stands in stark contrast to Moses, where in Scripture we read that Moses was the most humble man who lived, and Ramses II appears to be a man with an oversized ego, with an outsized ego. So as we go inside, we're going to have a chance to see what this temple looked like, and I want you just to be able to take it in. It's one of the sights that you see at night when you come to Luxor because of its beauty in the evening. So let's go inside. So we're getting ready to go into the Holy of Holies here in the Temple in Luxor. So this represents the throne room of Amun-Ra. It represents the holiest place in the temple. And the same idea again carries through in the temple in Jerusalem when it was built much later. And in the tent of meeting that Moses builds, the tabernacle, that portable sanctuary. So the ideas, the way it's set up, are very similar. It comes and drawn from the temples like this one. So let's go inside the Holy of Holies. Let's see what it's like. From here we go on to explore other sites here in Egypt as we continue to contemplate the significance of the Ten Commandments. Let's go.
Well, let's go back and discuss a little bit about Moses now. As Adam pointed out, we know that long before he was called to lead the people of Israel out of Egypt, he killed a man. In fact, he had to run out into the desert, so to speak, after that. But Moses, we also know, having been raised in the Pharaoh's household, would have been very well educated, and he would have known a lot of things. For example, he would have known that killing was certainly against the law, but when God gave him the commandment, do you think that would have been different? I mean, every society knew that you shouldn't kill. Obviously, he wouldn't have run away if it had been okay to kill. But then he's standing on Mount Sinai, leading all these unimaginably numbered people, and he gets this information straight from God to take back to the people. Thou shalt not kill. How do you think he would have felt at that moment? Put yourself in his place.
Afraid.
it would have been a whole new awareness. I knew this was bad, and I knew that I had run for my life, but now I'm standing literally before God. And I think, speaking for myself, I would have probably thought, well, there it goes. I mean, there's no going back. Thou shalt not, but I did, you know, so where do we go from there? Actually, we're going to spend a little bit more time. We don't know what Moses felt or thought, but it leads us to the whole idea of what we are commanded not to do. And I think the good point that Adam makes is that, and I can't speak because I don't know how many people are watching, but I'm willing to guess if you cared enough to watch this video, you probably have not committed a killing of a human being and are not planning one. And if so, I probably don't want to hear about it because I'd have to report you. But then we heard the importance of using a different word, and we know that our scholars are constantly learning about the Hebrew language and so forth and so on. And we know that killing means something, but murder means something else. And that would even differ if we talk about, if we had 100 folks from WhiteStone in the chapel right now, I think they might disagree. For example, if I say, okay, we're going to have a calf prepared to be turned into steaks, killing or murder. Most people would probably say killing. Some would say, you murdered that innocent calf, you know. But for our purposes today, I want us to think in terms of the commandment, maybe meaning more, thou shalt not murder. Because Adam makes a good point, and the fact that the Bible refers to times when killing seems to be okay. And then also times when, I lost my train of thought, I'm sorry, when killing is okay, and when battles and things like that. Because a lot of us feel like that thou shalt not kill, and people have shared this in small groups and in Sunday school classes and so forth, well then there should be no war. Every time we have a war, we're violating God's commandment. But based on our scripture, it appears that things like killing for needed food, killing to protect yourself, or, you know, in the name of a legitimate war, seem to be okay. But murdering someone, what would be in place for you to turn killing into murdering? There's one word for me, but what's the difference?
Personal.
Joanne?
Personal.
Personal? Yeah, that's very close on the. It is personal, and personal in that when you murder, what's in your heart?
Malice.
Malice, anger, wanting revenge, wanting to do pain, wanting to end life. I think most soldiers would be the first to say that is not their intent when they go into war. They don't want to kill people, but they are prepared to do whatever they have to do. I always joke with my family, although it's not totally a joke, that if I could be born again, physically born again, that I would probably want to be a vegetarian because I just don't like the idea of animals having to be killed so that I can eat. But I was brought up so that is not the case with me. But I would not think any of the people that are involved in providing meat and fish for our tables do it with malice. Would you think? That'd be pretty sick. And we don't know that, but that would be pretty sick. So, first and foremost, God does not want us to murder. For lack of a better word, it's like to kill without a legitimate purpose. Although in another session we could almost unpack that a little bit. So how does Jesus flip this commandment into a thou shalt? We know thou shalt not kill, but what does Jesus say that we shall do? Well, let's start out by looking at where this first murder came. First murder came in Genesis 4. Who killed whom?
Cain.
Abel. Yeah, Cain killed Abel. Now, was that a killing or a murder?
It was murder.
Murder.
It was a murder, yeah. Now, his attorney would probably say it was accidental, that he was just trying to get his attention, or, you know, that he was mad at him. But so manslaughter, whatever. But in the Bible, it would say killing, but we would see that as because he was jealous, first and foremost, that means his heart was not in the right place for a legitimate killing. So we would call that murder. And it just seems like soon after the world has just become consumed with violence. And it hasn't slowed down. It didn't slow down right after Sinai, did it? There wasn't a big revival after Moses came down. And everybody said, oh, we get it now. These are the things we can't do anymore, so we won't kill anything. No, that didn't happen at all. And how did God feel about that? He brought his people out of Israel, out of Egypt. He gave them the 10 most important things for them to live good lives. They have ignored that. He was destroyed. He was heartbroken. So after enough time had passed that there was not any real positive change, if anything there was more negative change, what did God do then? Whoosh. That was a hint. He decided to start over again. And how did he start over again?
Noah?
He brought the flood with Noah, exactly. And he prepared everything in this earth to begin again with Noah and just a few animals and Noah's sons and their families. This is a pronouncement from God. Whoever sheds human blood, by human his blood will be shed. For in the divine image God made human beings. Doesn't that support what the rabbi said? It's biblical guarantee. It's written in Genesis chapter 9, verse 6. Anyone who sheds human blood, by human, his blood will be shed. Because you have killed the divine image of God, basically, is what that's saying. Well, regarding this verse, Hamilton writes at the end of the section entitled Murder in the Bible, that this provides a theological basis for human rights in Western civilization. Would you agree with that? I mean, it would be a good human rights thing to have in place if we didn't have a biblical faith, but the Bible provides absolute support. So when we say it would be a good thing for other countries to have this human rights plan, or that the United States might have it's not just a good societal thing, but it's a biblical thing. So harming a human being is an offense against God. Now notice I didn't say kill there, I said harming. And we heard that in the video. To kill is to destroy God's possession and to violate someone who was created in God's image. Joanne, let's see if we can take this closer and closer to what it's really saying and more in depth. Would you read Isaiah 2:4 and then move on and read Isaiah 11:6-7? Let's listen.
He will judge between the nations and will settle disputes for many people. They will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nations will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war anymore. And you go on to Isaiah 11. The wolf will live with the lamb, the leopard will lie down with the goat, the calf and the lion and the yearling together, and a little child will lead them. The cow will feed with the bear, their young will lie down together, and the lion will eat straw like the ox. And am I going through 9?
9a, the first half of verse 9.
The infant will play near the hole of the cobra, and the young child will put his hand into the viper's nest. They will neither harm nor destroy, and on my holy mountain, for the earth will be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea.
Now, Joanne, when you read that, it's just a whole litany of everything that's going to be joined with almost its opposite, if you would. What do you think those verses say to you about God's desire for his world?
I think God's intent in the final is to be peace among all nations, and will resolve our differences.
Yes. And he gives some pretty dramatic examples of the various animals and just everything that would never be put near the other thing because it would be violent and end in death. And so we know what God wants. Have you ever had somebody say to you, well, just tell me what you want? You know, don't make me guess, tell me what you want. Spouses often do that, you know, just tell me what you want. Well, I think sometimes we want to ask God in our prayers, God, just help me know what you want me to do, or help me know how you want me to handle this. There's no secret here, is there? God, how do you feel about killing for whatever reason? He's against it, right? In a perfect world, and isn't that what he created in the garden, however we view that? It was a perfect world to begin with. He didn't mess it up. Well, Hamilton goes on in writing in his book, this picture of a world without violence is a picture of God's ideal world, perhaps even a picture of heaven. It points to a world where no one, not even the animals, kill. But we don't live in that world yet. We don't, do we? It's, for me, almost unimaginable. But we talk about perfection. We talk about heaven. And heaven being a place where everything is perfect. Well, killing would not really fit into that. And in this chapter, Adam addresses self-defense, war, and manslaughter in relation to this commitment. So, what are your thoughts on his conclusions? Are there times when you could see yourself put in a position where you would kill? Yeah. Now, those of us that are here at WhiteStone and of a mature age feel like we've got a better chance maybe of that not happening, but it doesn't go without saying that can you see yourself being accosted by someone and having to defend yourself? I think we all have to admit that that thought goes through our minds. And defending ourselves could lead in harming another person. And even though it might not be your intention, it could lead to the death of that person. Any other thoughts that have gone through your mind about this? Does it trouble you? Or does it give you a better understanding of the commandment? Because we're going to take it even further, as you know.
I was in the service,
Yeah.
so I went through basic training, and this has been in my mind forever. You got a rifle, and you go to a firing range, and you learn to fire at a round circle. And you do that until you're proficient enough that you're hitting the target most of the time. The next phase is then to a different firing range. And when you get to that firing range, you're not looking at a circle, you're looking at a human silhouette. And all of a sudden, you really understand what it is that you're there for. Do you ever justify that in your mind? I fortunately didn't have the opportunity to use that and have a human being in the sights. But just the very fact that I have now become a trained killer.
Yeah. And in the military, rewarded in various ways for how proficient you became at it. If we wanted to get into that conversation. I think that's a wonderful question, and I think it's one that whether or not we've been trained to kill, for whatever reason, it takes us back to the fact that in the Old Testament particularly, it seems to support that there is a time for battle and a time for killing, not necessarily murder. Here I think is the hard part for me, and I will let each of you decide how you want to think about that, but who decides if the war that you're about to engage in is called for? Is it legitimate? I think that leaders with ill intentions would not think about that, and I think leaders who have had the best of intentions can be mistaken, can't they? And often we don't know until sometime later. Maybe sometimes only God would know if you had other choices or not. I do think the biblical understanding for me would be try everything else humanly possible before, going to a situation where somebody's going to die. In a lot of cases, a lot of people are going to die. But it is very difficult. And I think that's another reason we need to always keep our military in our prayers, because they are in situations where they feel called to be there for us. And yet, as Ted said, they're in a situation to commit killing. And inadvertently, it might not be necessary. What would hopefully not be going on in the hearts of Ted, or Ted's heart, if he was put in a position where he had to shoot at another combatant on the other side? He might be scared. He might be focused. I've got to get this guy because those troops are coming. But hopefully he wouldn't have a hatred or an anger toward that individual. Are you with me? Mm-hmm. Do you think that might make the difference?
Yes.
I can't speak for God, but again, it seems to be that when we, yes, Ted?
But that occasion will never leave that person.
No.
I have a good friend who knew specifically the person that he killed in service. Yeah. And he carried that for 65 years.
Mm-hmm. And as horrible as that is, the fact that our soldiers and others carry that pain tells us that their heart knew that that was a very serious, if not bad thing. And that gives me hope that a human being would take that seriously, even though it's very painful, very, very painful. And so as we move on into how Jesus interpreted these things, he went further than just the killing, the death, if you will. We find that his words have implications for being on the taking of another human life, but words that have power to liberate us from bitterness and resentment and replace them with freedom and joy. Let's see if we can look at that side of things, because it's all going to come back together. Jeannie, if you would please read Matthew 5, 21 and 22, please. And this is in the Sermon on the Mount.
Okay. Ye have heard that it was said by them of the old times, thou shalt not kill, and whoever shall kill shall be in danger of judgment. But I say that whoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of the judgment. And whosoever shall say to his brother, Raca, shall be in danger of the council. But whosoever shall say, thou fool, shall be in danger of hell fire.
So, Jeannie, in your opinion, what emotion would you say Jesus is connecting to that Sixth Amendment? Commandment, I'm sorry. What feeling? What emotion?
Well, it all deals with anger.
Anger. Exactly, spot on. Anger. Now, the whole scene changes. How many times have you heard people say, or have you said, well, the Old Testament's important, and it's about God, and all, but things were different then. I'm more of a Jesus person, and I go with what Jesus says. Well, that puts us in a precarious situation, doesn't it? Because Jesus is saying, when we're angry, it's a first step toward killing. Now we're in trouble, aren't we? Except for those folks who've never been angry. Chuck, don't you say a word. I may have lost my temper a time or two in my lifetime, and I'll bet everyone here has. And of course, it was always for a very good reason, right? But the Sixth Commandment isn't just about killing, but Jesus says, but harming them, insulting them, or hurting them. Have you seen anger destroy relationships? Think for just a minute. Does someone in the relationship have to physically die?
No.
No, the relationship can die. You say, well, I see it so much in domestic violence in families, spouse to spouse, but not always. Sometimes, between siblings and so forth and so on. I've said this several times, and Chuck and I have talked about it. And if you are in this kind of marriage, then I'm certainly not telling you what to do. But I know that we have friends who argue and say horrendous things to each other. And then they're just fine, and they just go on their way, and they seem to be happily married. Do you believe that there are angry words you can say in a relationship where there's no coming back? That you can't get beyond it? I think there are. That you can be so angry and you can say such horrible things that you can't come back. I've said that Chuck has never called me a name. Isn't he a saint? He's never called me a name. I've never called him a name. If he did, I'd be so devastated, I don't know that I could ever get over it. And we have friends who say, well, that's just silly. Anger can destroy a relationship. And we don't always know where it starts and where it's going to end. So again, in the Sermon on the Mount, the greatest sermon ever preached, Jesus goes even further than just not hurting your enemies. Ted, how about reading Matthew 5, 43 through 45?
Law of love. You have heard that it was said, for most to love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemy and pray for those who harass you, so that you will be acting as children of your Father who is in heaven. He makes the sun rise on both the evil and the good, and sends rain on both the righteous and the unrighteous.
So, instead of necessarily thou shalt not kill, what does Jesus command us to do instead?
Love everybody.
Yes, well that sounds easy.
If you're not around anybody.
If you're isolated, and then do you ever not love yourself? Or is it just me? Sometimes it's hard to love ourselves, isn't it? So in the chapter's final section, and we need to get to the end of this one, unfortunately, our author writes, when I read the commandments in the eyes of Jesus, what a great way to read them, we recognize that the command prohibitive of murder is ultimately a command for love. Loving one's enemy doesn't mean so many warm feelings for them. It is to see them as a human being, created in the image of God, and treat them as you wish they had treated you. Or if it's a stranger, who would treat you if you were together. Off of this kind of love, often this kind of love looks like mercy. Are there people that we really don't want to give that kind of mercy to? We have a hard time with it.
Mm-hmm.
How about serial killers? Are they on your prayer list at night? We, if we're honest, often are judgmental when people who've been sent to prison for crimes, not even necessarily murder, when they're released. We're not even willing to concede that they've paid their price and they deserve to start fresh. So we're not really big into this loving our enemies or even loving others who've done things we feel are wrong. And we're judge and jury. Doesn't matter what the jury decided. We know they were guilty. Or they should have had, we're always ready to pile it on a little bit. So, have you ever seen God be merciful to you when you were maybe the enemy in some ways of the way you were acting? Mm-hmm. Probably more times than we would even be aware of. I think maybe that's the hard part, is that if we sat down and had nothing to do but just think back, because to realize that God gave us mercy, we have to realize that we were in the wrong. And we often don't, right? We often don't realize it. And so aren't we grateful that God's mercy flows down on us even when we're so ignorant that we don't know that we are sinning? So when you're hurt, your hearts are looking for vengeance. Do you ever want vengeance? Turn off the camera, Chuck, because I do. I'm sorry, I do. That's not right. They shouldn't have been allowed to do that. And da 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 da. Is that what Jesus is teaching? No. He teaches forgiveness and he remembers. Now, that's the good news. Isn't that what gospel means? Good news. That's the good news. These are the commandments. These are the expectations. This is how we are to live. But we also have the forgiveness that Christ gave us through our salvation. We are forgiven. Who was the most despicable person you remember Jesus forgiving? Father, forgive them. He's looking down at whom? Looking around at whom? The centurions and other folks who beat him within a centimeter of his life, nailed him to the cross, and were just standing there watching him die. Does that ever bother you when you read that during Holy Week? Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Did they know what they were doing? They knew they were beating up a human being. They knew that they were carrying out a law sentence. So far, so good. Did they know they were crucifying the Savior of the world?
No.
No. So there was an element of ignorance there, wasn't there? And of course, if that had been us, or one of our sons or daughters, would have been a son back then, we would have been so thankful that Jesus could forgive. But that forgiveness is almost more than we can understand, or that we can imagine. Have you ever received forgiveness or understanding from someone else when you knew you probably didn't deserve it? Y'all are such lovely people, I can't imagine that. But it's possible. We all make mistakes. You may just think about that. I've thought about it this week and tried to think of times. And I know there have been. Chuck would say, yes, I have forgiven you many times when you didn't deserve it. But seriously, what effect does it have when someone gives us mercy or forgiveness or grace that we don't deserve? Is that a bad thing? Is it ever a bad thing? Let's just go. Is it ever a bad thing when you've been forgiven and granted mercy when you didn't deserve it?
You have a feeling of guilt.
You might have some feelings because you know you didn't deserve it, but is there usually going to be a bad outcome from that? I think Jesus would say no, that there's not a bad outcome from that. What about if you don't get that forgiveness? Could there be a bad outcome? Yeah. Because they're harboring that resentment, they're remembering. I remember back at all 8 when Grandma's sister said so-and-so, and I'll never forgive her, right? Yeah. Who's that hurting?
Yourself.
Grandma's sister's been dead and buried forever, but still eating away at you, you know? So Jesus would say, there's no good when we fail to forgive. And I remind myself that not every day, but pretty often. Because sometimes it seems like if we forgive, if we grant mercy, which would mean to continue in a relationship, that it's just not fair. It's just not right. And when we say something's not fair, it's not right, what are we doing? What are we acting like?
Judge.
The judge. And I believe there's some scripture that talks about that. Well, we definitely got to wrap up here. One of the things that Adam mentioned that I found interesting was he has asked his congregation to memorize this verse. Don't let any foul words come out of your mouth. Only say what is helpful when it is needed for building up the community, so that it benefits those who hear what you say. Would that change our Congress? Well, it'll be quiet for a long time. No, I'm kidding. A little bit. Would it change our committee sessions? Would it change our Bible studies? Would it change your having coffee with a friend or lunch with it? It would change all of that, wouldn't it? I know that I've known people where others have said, I never heard her say an ugly word or an unkind word about it. Wouldn't you love for that to be said about you? And that should be our goal. So if you say, well, you know, I've made that mistake several times, so, you know, can we start today? Can we start today with that vow? Those of us who are in situations to give input would do well, I think, to reflect on that. Because sometimes when we're trying to help, we can be a little hurtful without even meaning to be. Well, we're going to close with the thought that Moses taught us, do not kill. Well, he taught us that because God told him to. But then Jesus says, don't harm others. Don't return insult for insult. And that's where we good Christians run amok. Have you ever felt that the sixth commandment wasn't relevant to you? I don't need to worry about number 6, I'm good. I think possibly, and with the best of intentions, if you really thought it meant to end someone's life through a violent act or whatever. But after today's session, can you see that it does relate to literally every person that you know? Except a few perfect people. And we always say only Jesus was perfect. But seriously, we are asked to forgive others and to love others without necessarily liking them, but to love them. And so I would ask you to think about any little thing you do that maybe would be harmful to another person. For me, it would probably fall under the, and I'm not asking you to have true confessions, but I will share that for me, it's probably in the big, broad category of gossip. And I don't like the word gossip, but I'll just use that because we all know what it means. Here's a clear example. When I shared with you earlier about one of our residents and their health situation, I was very clear about the fact that it's important that we don't share information without someone's permission. And sometimes people get angry with me because I won't share information. But I have to remind myself, if I'm sharing information, what is my motivation? And it needs to always be for the right thing. And sometimes, not just women, men do this a lot. We have information, we want to share it. And 1 minute it's just information, and the next minute it's hurtful. And so we have to ask ourselves, was it necessary for me to share that? Was there anything helpful involved with that? And I think that's a lesson for all of us. So quickly now, we're going to move into one that's challenging to discuss, and that is the commandment not to commit adultery. So our objectives here are to learn what Jesus reveals about our hearts through this commandment. And we're going to look at Adam's video and hear what he has to say about how we can live in right relationship with others through not committing adultery. Let's listen.
Today we come to the 7th commandment, and as we do that, we're going to be exploring the commandment to not commit adultery. The fact that this has to be one of the top 10 commandments tells us that in the ancient world, this was a serious issue, just like it is today. So we often think that we live in this hyper-sexualized era, and we do. But you know, this was a struggle for the people in the ancient Egyptian times. It was a struggle for the Israelites who were set free from slavery. This is a struggle, our human struggle with our sexual desires, our drives, and relationships that bring harm to other people. So we're going to explore that in this session today. But before we do that, I want to take you back to Egypt. And I want to take you back to just south of Luxor, actually just south of the Valley of the Kings, is a temple. It's on the back side of that. It's a temple that is one of the wonders of ancient Egypt. It's Hatshepsut's temple, her funerary temple. And Hatshepsut was one of the first, if not the first, female pharaohs. Now, typically the pharaohs were men. So what happened when she becomes pharaoh is she has to be transformed into a man. And so she goes into a room, the priests pray, there's a certain liturgy that happens, and when she comes out, while she still looks like a female, she has in essence become a male. There's something interesting that's happening in the story. And she builds this temple as a place to remember her in her death. And I want you to have a chance to see it. I don't want you to miss it. And I want to take you there now so you can see Hatshepsut's temple. Standing in front of Hatshepsut's temple, which is just the other side of the Valley of the Kings. And here we have the temple that was built by Hatshepsut. She was one of the few female rulers over Egypt. Born in 1507, she died in 1458. The next ruler, after the pharaoh had died, the next ruler was only 4 years old. And so she had ruled alongside her husband, and instead of turning the kingdom over to a 4-year-old, which was violating the rules, the priest decided to turn it over, at her encouragement, to Hatshepsut, which was also a violation of the rules. In order for her to continue to rule as Pharaoh, once the 4-year-old became 8, old enough to rule over Egypt, the requirement was that she build a temple to Hathor. And as she built the temple to Hathor, there was a regeneration room in the temple. She went in the regeneration room, and after spending the night there, when she emerged, it was said that she became a man. So she was still in the body of a woman, but she became a man, and she is now said to have permission to rule over the kingdom or the empire of Egypt. And so she becomes the Pharaoh of Egypt, one of the few female pharaohs. We're going to go inside and take a look, and then we'll talk a little more about how this connects with Moses. Depending on when we date Moses, she either is, some have said she was the princess who pulled Moses out of the river Nile, or she lived before his time if we give a late dating of Moses. But it's an interesting, what you see here was built somewhere around the time of Moses, before or during the time of Moses. I suggest probably way before the time of Moses, within 100 years of that. But let's go take a look. So here again at the temple of Hatshepsut, you have a chance to see the mountains up above into which this temple was carved. And then below what you find is the altar. And so there were steps on the one side. Animals would be offered as sacrifice on the altar. And this gives you a sense of what the temple of Jerusalem was like, and the altar in which the priests would offer their sacrifices. It was, the ideas were used throughout the ancient Middle East or ancient Near East. And you have a chance to see what that looked like here as people would offer their sacrifices to the Egyptian gods. So while there are not lots of connections I want to draw from the Temple of Hatshepsut to the Ten Commandments, I wanted you to have a chance to see this. Since we were in Egypt, I thought you'd really need to see this. Many of you will never be here, and I thought you might enjoy having a chance to see this magnificent temple, one of the wonders, one of the treasures really of ancient Egypt. I find Hatshepsut's temple absolutely astounding. Now behind me, you see the sun setting on the west side of the Nile. You see the Nile River, and you see the mountain there. It's at the base of that mountain where Hatshepsut's temple is found. But you see here next to me the goddess Sekhmet. Sekhmet is portrayed as a lioness, and she is the daughter of Ra, and she is fierce. Like a lioness, she is fierce, and she brings the wrath of the gods upon those who have violated the moral commandments, like you shall not commit adultery. And so she brings plagues and other acts of judgment. But if you obey the laws, if you follow the commandments, you obey the moral laws in Egypt, then and you offer her sacrifices, she becomes the domesticated cat, the goddess Bastet. And there she is your companion, and she cares for you and protects you and watches over you. So I want us to think together as we ponder her role in bringing wrath upon the Egyptians. I want us to think together about God's command for us not to be with someone else's spouse. And to talk about this, I want to go back to our conversation with Rabbi Art Nemitov. Let's join that conversation once more. Well, let's talk about adultery. So the commandment seems pretty straightforward. What did it mean in the ancient world, or was it read any differently in the ancient world, or did it apply differently in the ancient world? And why is this commandment important for us today?
Well, adultery means that you do not take something that belongs to another person in terms of property. And in days gone by, women, sadly, were seen as pieces of property that were bought and sold, bought by the husband and sold by the father. Thank God today that's not the world that we live in. But as a result, when you commit adultery, you're taking something that doesn't belong to you. And I believe that's how it can be viewed today. That adultery is the most intimate of the marriage relationship, or the partner relationship is the most intimate of relationships. And when you violate that, you're violating that connectedness. So going back to that parallel, ours is do not worship another god, do not make idols for yourself. That equals adultery. When we say you shall not commit adultery, we're saying that the marriage relationship or the partner relationship is unique and special. So too do we believe that it parallels the idea of worshiping only one God. Our relationship is with one God. Our commitment is to one God. So too should our partner or marriage relationship be with one individual, not with more than one. And that's the connection between the two.
As human beings, we struggle with our sexuality. I mean, the reality is that not a single one of us, put in the wrong set of circumstances, couldn't find ourselves doing something that we would later regret. We have both a sin drive and a sex drive, and these two work together to lead us to think things we shouldn't think, to say things we shouldn't say, and sometimes to do things we shouldn't do. And this commandment is reminding us that we are called to monitor our minds and our hearts. And what Jesus teaches us once more, he turns it on its head or makes it even harder. He says it's not just about what you do, it's about what you think. And so we have to train our minds. We have to ask for his help to train our minds to be able to focus on what's right and good and to bless and not to harm other people, not to do things that are putting us at the center of the world and taking what doesn't really belong to us or giving ourselves to someone when we really belong to someone else. So I want to encourage you to, as you think about this, in our hypersexualized society, it's really hard to follow this commandment. And not just the way Moses had said it. I think, I've never violated this commandment when it came to being with another woman besides my wife. But the thoughts that come into our minds, that's just a part of life in the world we live in. We're surrounded by this. And so what I want to remind you of is we're called to have holy thoughts. We're called to live our lives and to have our hearts and our minds focused on the right and not the wrong, to be faithful even in the inner thought life. But I also want to remind you of this, that when a woman was brought to Jesus who was caught in the very act of adultery, as I mentioned in the book, and the righteous men, the Pharisees, the keepers of the law, came and they brought their stones to stone her because the law commanded that if you were caught in the act of adultery, you would be stoned to death. You remember they brought her to Jesus. Where was the man? They didn't pay attention to whatever happened to the man. They brought the woman to Jesus, and they threw her at Jesus' feet. And I love this in John chapter 8, this story that circulated as an independent fragment for a very long time before it was inserted into the Gospel of John. They came to Jesus and they said, Jesus, what do you think? She was caught in the act of adultery, and they were trying to set up a trap for him where he would disobey the law by setting her free because they knew she was merciful to people who had violated the commandments. And they have their stones in their hands, ready to stone her to death. I picture her weeping and shaking in fear, not even looking up. And you remember Jesus kneels down and he begins to write on the dirt. And then he looks up at them and he says this, "The one of you who has never sinned, you cast the first stone." And one by one, they all dropped their stones and walked away. And then he turned to the woman and he lifted her up and he said, "Woman, where are your accusers? Neither do I condemn thee. Go and sin no more." I want you to hear this, that every one of these commandments calls us to a high moral standard. But along with that is how Jesus actually practiced ministry, which was to be rich in mercy. And so if you've blown it in this area, I invite you simply to call upon Christ and invite him to show you mercy, to wash you clean and to make you new. And I invite all of us to say, Lord, please help me in my secret thought life and in my actions to honor you. Would you pray with me? Lord, how grateful we are that you are rich in mercy and abounding in steadfast love. How grateful also that you call us to such high standards, that you ask us to be able to focus our minds and our hearts in the right place, to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. And that means not to take advantage of someone who is not our spouse, to be faithful to our spouse. And, oh Lord, to be careful what we put into our hearts and our minds. You know how we struggle, oh God, in this hypersexualized world we live in. Please help us to be faithful to one another, to be faithful to you. And when we have failed in any part of our lives, we ask for you to forgive us, to wash us clean, and make us new. In your holy name, amen.
I feel like that Adam Hamilton did a particularly good job in that video of encapsulating this commandment as it was in the Old Testament, and certainly as it really relates to the reality of our society. We begin with the whole idea that adultery, we immediately think sex, don't we, or something physical. But don't we sometimes say, well, they adulterated that book, or they adulterated something, because it means to take away from, or to So it wasn't really the word itself that had to do it, but it had to do with taking something that wasn't yours, that would harm another individual. Always going back to that, harming another individual. And even though he talked about it's not said as anything like the spell, but anyway, but talking about her as a female Pharaoh, that was all rather strange, but it led us into the idea that we can't forget the context of everything in the Bible, particularly in the Old Testament. And the context was that women were just things. You don't have to like it, you don't have to agree with it, but that's a fact. Women were just property. And so the laws and the commandments would have been interpreted differently, understood differently than they would be today. So when he talked with the rabbi, he said that the commandment connects with the second commandment to have no other gods before me. Is that odd? How would being drawn to or being desirous of something you shouldn't have anything to do with having other gods before me? Can you make any sense of that?
Yeah, that would be another God.
Yes. If your heart and mind are only on that and wanting it or trying to figure out how to get it, or it's just consuming you, it's taking the place of God. It's taking the place of a lot of things in your life. Absolutely. Our relationship is to be with one God. And if we are married, it's to be committed to one person. Now, Jesus points out that this commandment isn't just about what we do. See, we'd be okay there, wouldn't we? Most of us could squeak through there pretty well, but it's what we think. Have you ever told yourself not to, don't let your mind, okay, don't think blue. Well, what's in everybody's mind? Blue, 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 blue. And so sometimes we say, oh, I just want to think about that, but our minds do that. Well, are there ways that we can train our minds to be more holy? Yeah. What are some ways that you think would be helpful in helping us to be mentally more holy? What could we do?
Pray.
Yes, we could pray. Always the best go-to. We could
Read the Bible.
study the Scripture. Yes, see what the messages for us in Scripture are. And then holding ourselves accountable. We do that when we want to lose weight, or if we want to walk more steps, or we have measures and we hold ourselves to the accountability. And that's so very true. Well, are there things we do or might do, whether we choose to or not, that could help us be less holy? And we're talking about 21st century, us right here. Are there things in your world on a daily basis that could take you from holy thoughts? Do you ever watch the television? You can't escape it if you watch the television for any length of time. And those of us who were around when the first TV sets were even available can't even imagine. I say this fairly often at our house. When an ad will come on, I'll say, Chuck, just a few years ago, that was illegal. You couldn't have a picture of that anywhere, especially if you gave it to a minor. You would go to jail. And now it's just a dancing little cute little commercial. And so those things are out there all the time. Is it hard to get something out of your head once it's been put in there? Yes. It is. So the more it's put in your head, the more likely it is to be in there. Now, I'm not saying that everybody has these what I call pornographic pictures in their heads. That's just my opinion. But the more they're put in there, the more you're likely to think about them. If you've watched a lot of murder mysteries, that's one of my guilty pleasures. I know more ways to kill people than I should know, So you put that stuff in there, and you've got to be consciously able to get it out of your daily thoughts. So that's what Jesus is saying. If you're thinking it, you've already messed up because you have a bad thought in your mind. And that makes it very, very difficult. God gave Moses instructions about how to live in relationship with God. And then he goes on with the last 6 about how to live in relationship with each other. And they go absolutely together. In the 7th commandment, do not commit adultery. It's a prohibition against murder that then goes to a prohibition against not just killing or murdering a person, but hurting them in such a way as to take their spouse's relationship or to take their pure thoughts away. Now, we know it's prevalent today. But I'm constantly amazed, the more I think about it, and as often as we can read Scripture, to see that it's nothing new. It's different in how it's lived out, right? But I was studying Corinthians 1 this week for the sermon. I do have a life, but I was studying 1 Corinthians. And to just read about the people of Corinth, and if you just change the names of the characters, and you're talking about Greensboro or New York City or, whatever. And so, if it was so prevalent back then, it's not surprising that societies as a rule had this saying that, this expectation that you would not commit adultery. And then God gave that to Moses. Well, was it a rule in society just because it was a nice thing? Or going back to what adultery means, did it have anything to do with property and possessions? It was a rule, and if you were found guilty of adultery, what gender would you most likely be?
Female.
Female. And who would be punished?
Amen.
Yeah. Well, I guess the tablet that I looked at and the scripture I looked at left that out, because it didn't say, thou shalt not commit adultery if you are a female. But that was the way it was interpreted. And to give a little grace to the folks of that day, that was as common for them to think men were people in charge and women were just their property, as it was for some people in generations before us to have whites only slapped on the door. They weren't putting those signs up because they thought they were doing something bad. They just, So that was the world that this came out of. But we live in a different world. And we have Jesus, God coming to earth to help us see a better way to live. And so we're taught about this whole violation. You are violating your husband's rights, but your husband would also violate your rights. But going on and on, it's not just about the sexual relationship, which we know today is certainly a big deal. Sylvia, help us out. Read Genesis 1, 27, 28.
So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, and over every living creature that moves on the ground.
Now, if we think in terms of a male and a female, or males and females, when God created walking, talking humanity, was there a relationship between those two? And what was that relationship? They were to rule over everything? Yeah. Did you hear Sylvia ever say, but it would be Adam's job to do this, and it would be Eve's job to do that? Or was it always the two together? It was a partnership. Oh, and where was that? In the still perfect creation. Yeah. But when Adam and Eve were cast out of Eden, what did sin do to their relationship? I don't think you might have it marked, but you're in Genesis already, Sylvia. Look at Genesis 3:16. Read that for us.
To the woman he said, I will make your pains in childbearing very severe. With painful labor you will give birth to children. Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you.
Yeah, lots been made of that
Got a problem with
verse.
that?
Lots been made of that verse many, many times. And even the devil can quote scripture. But the thing is, what we forget is, here's here and here's perfection. Once sin entered in to human life, everything changed. So let's listen to what Adam says, and I want you to think about if this fits into your theology or not. Adam says, I believe that patriarchy and the subordination of women in human society, that those were never God's will. I agree. Genesis 3:16 was not prescriptive, rather the verse was descriptive. It was announcing how things would be in a broken world outside of Eden. It's how relationships would be distorted by sin. Are relationships distorted by sin? And the difference, physical strength that was generally seen in one gender would impact this relationship. This patriarch was seen as normative across the ancient world. But in Hamilton's view, it was not God's original or intended will. Now, if you were in a courtroom, what would be your defense if you were saying God never intended women to be subordinate, or there to be any difference between the two as far as power? What would be the main thing you might use to defend that? In the beginning, God created male and female. Male and female, he created he. Da-da-da-da-da. Was he absent-minded? God wasn't absent-minded.
No.
Did he forget to tell them in the Garden of Eden, in the perfect world, that, oh, one of you is not quite as important as the other? No. It was only after humanity chose to disobey God and think they could run things on their own. Anybody have a problem with what Adam's interpretation is? You don't have to agree with him. He's just another human being, just like we are, trying to understand what God's will is.
But he did bring out that in chapter 2, woman was created out of Adam's rib, and that made it.
Because she came second. She had to be, yeah, exactly. And again, we know that the Bible contains all kinds of literature and all kinds of symbolism. It was written by human beings. Okay, let's be honest, it was written by men. And they were still human to the best of my knowledge. They were human. Inspired by God, led by God, but always had the choice to interpret the way they thought was best. Have you considered this interpretation before? I think those of us of our age probably have. We've been confronted with it. And we probably felt one way at one point in our lives and maybe a different way at different points in our lives. And even now, as I'm entering the last quarter, I assume that I think sometimes even now we might go too far overboard in a different direction. Is that possible? I don't know. So it's something we might want to think about. But the important thing is that this idea of adultery is no longer a male issue. It's a male and female. I think that is the important thing. Now, this idea that he mentions in the book about King David and Bathsheba. Now, you know, we have all these romantic stories, and people have these stories in their lives. I took one look at her, and I fell head over heels in love, and there was nothing I could do. Well, you can back the train up to, I took one look. Now, let's be honest. I just talked about television. There are times you take one look and there's not much you can do about that. But David looked out. How long do you think it took him to figure out she was naked? A nanosecond. What would the smart thing for him to do have been? The respectful thing, to look away. But he didn't. Now stop there and look way down the road, on to Solomon even, and beyond. The course of history that backs all the way up to, he looked over and saw Bathsheba. So, he did look away. How many times do we not look away? Oh my goodness. Joanne, how about reading James? Love me some James. First chapter, 13 through 15. Oh, you didn't get that one?
No.
Well, go ahead and look that up, and I'm going to give us the questions to be thinking about when she reads it. What does this passage say about the dangers of our desires? It's not just, oh, I'm violating a commandment, but there are dangers. And how does this relate directly to David's actions?
What was the verse, chapter?
First chapter, 13 through 15.
When tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when, by his own evil desire, he is dragged away and enticed. Then, after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death.
Death from physical to emotional to death of relationships, absolutely. And it begins with the entering into the mind, absolutely. How can allowing a maybe the possibility of a sin? Isn't that like having a thought? Well, maybe I should get to know that person better. Well, maybe just having coffee with them would not be so bad. You know, we can be friends, whatever. The possibility of sin that opens the door to further sin. Jenny, have you got Matthew 5:27 through 28?
Like 27?
Mm-hmm.
Ye have heard that it was said by them of old time, thou shalt not commit adultery. But I say unto you that whosoever looketh on a woman to lust, after her hath committed adultery, with her already in his heart.
Yeah. Not good news for a lot of folks, is it? Not good news. What's the most profound example of someone understanding that you can remember in your lifetime?
Jimmy Carter.
Jimmy Carter. Yeah, Jimmy Carter. Yeah, he was asked if he had ever, basically, if he had committed adultery. He said, well, in my heart. He got it, didn't he? Now, you know, again, it's one thing to look at a male or female, this is not true confession check, and say, wow, that is one great looking person, you know, whatever. But it's another to think, maybe, you know, or just to have whatever thought. And so it's very dangerous to linger with that. So he admitted that he had committed adultery in his heart. And I have a feeling there were people out there saying, yeah, I figured you were just a bad person, when they were doing worse on a daily basis. But anyway, I won't get off on my political biases here. It's a warning to be on constant guard with our thought. And I thought about sin in particular. You know, you might go to a shrink and share some thoughts you've had or some, you know, maybe daydreams or whatever. And the shrink may say, oh, that's just fantasy. You're just, you know, acting like you're fantasies. Well, it might be good to let those fantasies go somewhere else and not be thinking about them. Well, near the end of this chapter, and I am moving us along, Adam writes, Jesus set impossible standards in his teaching and ministry. He forbade us from ever looking at another with lust in our hearts. If you don't know what lust means, send me after class. Yet when a woman was caught in the very act of adultery, not thinking it, doing it, Jesus refused to condemn her. Jesus forgave her and forced her accusers to set her free. He didn't really force them. He said, if you're without sin, go ahead and stone her. But that, in fact, was a way. Now, why would Jesus not condemn her? There's an easy answer that we would just overlook. Why would Jesus not condemn her?
Well, he was making them think of the way they think in their heart.
True enough, yes. He could have been thinking more from the compassion for the woman, which is what he always taught. What was basically Jesus' mission on earth? The human Jesus came to earth to
Save the earth.
To save the world, yes. To offer us forgiveness for our sins. Jesus was the new Adam. Remember I said once they went out, everything changed? And God doesn't change his mind. He said, you will die. And yet he wanted to provide another way. And the way was to come to earth and start fresh with forgiveness of sins. Do you think Jesus knew right then that he was going to die for our sins? I suspect he did. Mm-hmm. And so he was not going to fail to forgive her. Do you think that those of us who truly believe that God has forgiven our sins and there's no sin he won't forgive, that gives us license to do whatever we want to do? No. Is there a difference? Do you think that it's almost required that we acknowledge the forgiveness and ask for it? And with the intention that we won't continue to sin? Yeah. Not that it's just, collect $200 and keep going. How do you imagine Jesus' words sounded to that woman? is almost impossible for us liberated women to even imagine. But if we were in a situation where we were about to be killed by an angry mob, and someone just saved us from that, just that alone would be remarkable. But the way Jesus did it, she was a changed woman, I have no doubt. Changed in ways that we might not even imagine. There are one of the top 10 sins. Jesus shows that mercy is the way to react to that. What does that tell us about the mercy toward us when we see him? I just basically gave that away, didn't I? We are going to get mercy for our sins until the 11th time we do it. I don't read that anywhere. We will be given mercy, I believe, as long as we go to God in earnest prayer, requesting forgiveness and being offered another opportunity to do better. Well, this is, I think, an amazing commandment if we understand that it is way beyond sexual behavior. Now, please don't leave the session, and those of you out there thinking that, oh, it's really not just about sex, so maybe the sex part's not so bad. No, it's bad. It's bad. Because it's all bad. Taking what isn't yours is bad. And thinking about wanting something that isn't yours, especially things that will destroy another person, is a sin. What was true for this woman is also true for us. Though the Lord offers us infinite forgiveness through Jesus, our sin can also lead to serious and devastating consequences. Does God's forgiveness undo the mess we've created? Do you think, we know God forgave David, and David messed up a lot, but he always said he was a man after God's heart, and he always was with David. But did he fix what David caused by Bathsheba and having her husband killed and on and on? No. Free will was still there. So we can be forgiven, but there are things that the decisions we make, the decisions I have made, that God will help us get through them and make something good out of them, but not erase them. We've made our bed, so to speak. Thankfully, we have our Lord's words to serve as our guidelines, or kind of our guardrails to hopefully keep us all on the straight and narrow. I don't know if you noticed, but in the book, he gives 5 R's for resisting temptations. And if you have the book, I hope that sometime this week you'll go back and see if any of those resonate with you. Just take a few minutes to read through them. And then ask the Lord to open your eyes to any maybes that might be leading you down a dangerous path. None of us are exempt or inoculated against having bad thoughts. I like to think that it's not your biggest concern, but when we let something get pushed to the back, it can sneak up on us when we least expect us. And unlike our younger folks out there that think after 75 we have no feelings or desires for anything, we know that's not true, don't we? So, and thank goodness for that. Let's pray as we end this session on the 6th and 7th commandment. Lord, we thank you for your word, that holy word that provides us with these guardrails and guidance to help us avoid the pain and destruction that sin always wreaks on our world. Thank you for the forgiveness you so graciously give when we mess up. And Lord, we know that before this day ends, we will mess up. Your faithfulness to us is beautiful, and your grace is absolute. And we praise you for all that. In Jesus' holy name. Amen.
Amen.
Next week, we'll be looking at 8 and 9, the commandments 8 and 9, and I hope you'll join us. Goodbye.